Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
For many of us engaged in conflict or embroiled in a dispute, it can be very difficult to muster up empathy and compassion for the other side. The longer the conflict goes unresolved, it seems the less empathy we have for them as a human being. And in this first of our 4-episode series, Conflict and Empathy, Where Has Empathy and Compassion Gone? We will introduce the wheel of empathy and the feel of empathy as defined by Edwin Rutsch, founder of the global empathy movement called the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. Now, Edwin and I will discuss how compassion intertwines with empathy and set the foundation for how you build empathy. And so we will continue this series every Tuesday in June. Now, our guest, Edwin Rutsch, is the founding director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and you can find him simply at cultureofempathy.com. It is the largest website on the Internet focused on nurturing and fostering empathy. And after spending about 10 years as a seeker traveling, working, and studying his way around the world, Edwin worked for many years in the computer technology field. And after discovering the power of empathy, he has dedicated his life to raising the level of empathy in society and building a global culture of empathy. And again, I really encourage you to see his website. He has so much great information and videos there at cultureofempathy.com. Now, we are taking live callers tonight at 347-324-3591. You simply press 1 if you have any questions or comments. And we also have the chat room open if you'd like to post your comments or questions there. And simply go to blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach. And we have that chat room open now. So, Edwin, welcome. I'm so excited. We've been planning this for quite some time, and finally it is here. So, yay.
Yay. I'm so excited to be here with you, Patty. Been really looking forward to this dialogue about conflict and empathy.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and a lot of times those two terms, empathy and compassion, can get intertwined, confused, you know, what really is it? And I want to let listeners also know that, you know, Edwin's going to be with us the whole month of June. And so every Tuesday night we will have an episode either live or pre-recorded. And let me just say to listeners that Edwin and I are going to do something a little innovative on the Texas Conflict Coach, in that we are going to be recording 2 of the episodes of the Google Hangout. So we're going to have a video component. So be staying tuned about how you access the video portion of our episodes, and so that will be exciting to get to see Edwin and I in action, live on video, so very good. So, Edwin, you know, we want to let listeners know, before we get into the kind of the specifics about what really is empathy and compassion, how did you really get started? You talked about being a traveler and and if I might say, a computer geek.
Yeah,
but how
true.
in the world did you get started with this building a culture of empathy and creating the center?
Yeah, how do you get from computer geek to empathy evangelist? Yeah, well, I think it kind of goes back to my traveler's days. You know, as a real seeker, and like you had mentioned, had traveled all around the world, worked my way around the world, and I was really looking for the meaning of life. You know, what is life all about? What is, you know, what am I here for? And then, you know, I did that for quite a while, and then kind of got into the technology field, like you had mentioned as well. But then I kind of felt kind of a longing to get back into the humanities and really get back into that search. And the way I kind of did that search of, you know, what is life about, is I started looking at human values and I was going to do some documentaries on values like, what is fear? What is inspiration? What is trust? And I started exploring these values and did some videos on them. And then when I asked people about what their most important values were, people who talked about caring and compassion, I would ask them, well, tell me the story of how that value became important to you. And the stories they recounted, their eyes would well up with tears, and they would recount stories of, how empathy and compassion were important to them. And I said, wow, there's really something here. And because this really resonates with me, I think this is really what I was really searching for, is that sense of connection with others and that sense of caring and community with others. And then around that time, Barack Obama also was running for office, and he started talking about empathy as well. He said, hey, the country has this empathy deficit, and I think we really need to fill, that empathy deficit in our country. And that really resonated with me. And I just started doing some documentary work, interviewing people, create a website. And the more and more I got into it, it was just like, this is so important. This is such a foundational value for bringing people together, for creating community, for creating caring and intimacy and love. So I really realized that this has kind of become more of a calling now to me, and wish I would have discovered it, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, but I'm glad I did discover the importance of empathy now.
Well, the thing about it is that the calling comes at the right time, right? I mean, so the time was right. You had to go through that journey, to make that connection. And it was funny as you were talking about, the sense of connection and caring commitment. I was writing C to the third power. Right? Community caring and connection and the work that you do with compassion. Actually, it could be C to the fourth power, right? And connects to your technology kind of background.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we'll have to put that as a little logo on your center, C to the fourth power, compassion, connection. Yeah, exactly. So your journey has taken you to this place, and so when did you actually start the center then?
It would be about 5.5 years ago.
Okay, because it's indicative of all the stuff you have on your website. I mean, your website is rich with, like you said, the videos, the documentaries, the interviews, and we're going to talk a little bit about these empathy circles that you do with video and get into that. But when we first started talking about empathy and compassion. And actually, I found you through some of the work I do with conflict coaching, and Cindy Noble, who's a really good friend and mentor for me out of Canada, said you must contact Edwin because of this work that he's doing. It fits so nicely with the work we do in conflict. And that's how I found you. And I was just like, oh, my gosh, he's doing some really powerful work. But when I started thinking about, empathy and compassion, a lot of people get those concepts confused, or they think it's one and the same, or how does it really show up, especially when conflict comes into play. So can you tell us from your exploration, as you were doing these documentaries and hearing these stories, what exactly is empathy and kind of what's the intention behind it? Help us to understand and untangle these two concepts.
Yeah, so with empathy, what you typically hear is the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes or looking through someone else's eyes. That's like the most common term that you hear when you kind of ask someone about what empathy is. But it's also feeling your way into someone else's experience. And that's kind of at the most easy to understand kind of, a way of looking at it. But you can really go into it in just like in a car. You can say, well, here's a car, but there's all the different various pieces to the car, and you can get even more, nuanced into kind of different parts of empathy. But kind of at the broadest sense, the way I like to think about it is just feeling your way into the experience of someone else.
And I like that. I mean, I think that's something that people are very have commonly heard, standing in the shoes. But I love your quote, feeling your way into someone's experience, meaning that they can really relate at an emotional level, with that individual and what they're going through. Now, what about, and the other thing that came up for me is sympathy. So how is empathy different from sympathy, different from compassion?
Yeah, so even one thing when you start looking into these terms, I've talked to a lot of the experts, all around the world, and one of the most difficult aspects about these terms is people use them differently. Even the academics use them differently. So I've really been making kind of an effort to, ask them about what is the difference with these words and how do you explain them. And so if we want to start looking at the differences between empathy, between sympathy and compassion, we can start with that empathy is feeling your way into someone else's experience. And then with sympathy, it's a bit like, let's say if you have, if you had a death in the family, and then, you're feeling, really in pain, and if I'm empathizing with you, I'm just hearing where you are about your pain. With that death or with that difficult situation. With sympathy, it's more like, oh, I feel sorry for you in your situation, which is a little bit of feeling sorrow for you instead of just kind of being there, being present with what your experience is. And sometimes the sympathy can also be like, oh, you're suffering. You're having this, really difficult experience. Well, let me tell you about my experience. And then it's kind of like, it's what it is. So empathy is me being present with you, with whatever you're feeling, the full spectrum of your feeling. It could be, a terrible situation like a death or something, and just being present with that. Or it could be any experience that you have, just being there, just being present and feeling my way into your experience. Whereas the sympathy is a bit like, oh, you have some problem. I'm kind of, feeling sorry for you. So it's a little bit about me feeling sorry for you, or it's about me kind of taking the attention away from you and saying, well, look at me. I have this problem as well. So they're similar. There's a similarity, but there's a real big difference as well. So then if we get into what's the relationship of compassion to this? And again, these words are used differently by different people, and so it's through my kind of asking people about it, trying to make sense of it. Kind of what I'm seeing is there's kind of two different ways of seeing compassion, and one is like an empathetic compassion, which is you have this, let's say, this death in the family, you're feeling really in distress. And so with empathy, you're experiencing the full experience of someone, but when they are in pain and suffering, that experience is called compassion or empathic compassion, that I'm being there, I'm being present with you in your deep pain and suffering. And you can, if you do a search, like a Google search on images, do a search on compassion for images, and you'll see, quite often it's a picture of someone in deep pain, deep suffering, and then someone's there just being as close as they can with their arm around them, holding them tight, being, just deeply having deep sense of presence with them. So that would be kind of the empathic compassion. And then the sympathetic, there's another form of compassion, I think, is sympathetic compassion. And that's, again, kind of having that sympathy for someone that's in distress. So, I don't know if that kind of makes sense to you, but that's kind of the basic differences that I'm seeing at kind of the broadest viewpoint.
When I was doing some Google search earlier about, how do people define compassion and empathy, I found the Psychology Today, and they were saying that, often saying that there was often a lot of confusion around it, and they said that compassion was a desire to alleviate or reduce the suffering of another, whereas empathy was like you described it, standing in someone else's shoes, and even more accurately so, or more and deeply, is the feeling your way into someone's experience. I really love that definition, by the way. And so they were defining that compassion as a way to, want to stop the pain and suffering of the other person. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say for me that there's also the empathy is the thing about that I like about empathy. It's really looking at the broad connection with feeling your way into someone's the full spectrum of their experience. I'm feeling my way into your creativity, into your joy, into your celebration, into your sorrow, into your anger, into your pain, into your suffering. So it's feeling the full spectrum of someone else. And then with that deep sense of connection, I do want to alleviate your suffering in that empathic connection, but it's done in a sense with a deep presence of really who are you and what is it that you need and want. And so it's kind of like a negotiated sort of a relieving of the suffering. And there's with the sympathetic compassion, sometimes it's a bit more like, this we sometimes see in foreign aid, right? Oh, we feel sorry for the people over there, so we're gonna send the people in Africa, woolen socks or something, because I feel sorry for them. That we're not really there in a deep communion with them. We're just kind of feeling sorry for them and wanting to do something for them and trying to alleviate it. It's almost not even trying to alleviate their suffering, but our own pain at them being in suffering. So that's how I kind of view it, and I think that some people might view it a bit differently. But for me, the empathic compassion is really about being in presence with someone and wanting their well-being. But it's also, if you're having a lot of fun, I want you to have even more fun.
Right. So it's not always about someone who's in pain. It's about being present with whatever they're experiencing, whether that's complete joy or celebratory type of experience. So it's whatever is along that continuum of emotion and experience that someone might be having in that moment.
Exactly. It's kind of like my mother always used to say, sorrows shared or sorrows halved, joy is shared or joy is doubled. Right? So it's like by sharing the experience with someone, kind of being present with someone, it increases whatever the positive feelings are that we have. It makes them even more positive. We have someone there to share those feelings with. So that's really what I like about the empathy. It's that full spectrum of being present with someone, and it's not only focusing on the pain and suffering component.
Okay, good. So I'm glad we made that distinction there. So let me just let listeners know who are just tuning in or coming into the chat room that you are listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and I'm speaking with Edwin Rutsch, Center for the Building of a Culture of Empathy, and we're starting this series this whole month around empathy and compassion. And Edwin did a great job of explaining his viewpoint based on lots of research and talking to a lot of experts about empathy and the feeling your way into someone's experience, and really about being fully present in whatever that experience that person is having, whether that's something that they're suffering from or from something that they're joyful about, so the spectrum of emotions they might be experiencing. But picking up those two elements of feeling your way into someone's experience and being present. Now, I know there's a couple of concepts we're going to also explore. You talk about the wheel of empathy and the feel of empathy, but before we do that, I guess what's coming to my mind right now, especially when you made the point earlier when President Obama said that we have in this world, or maybe in the United States, but in this world, an empathy deficit. When we talk about conflict and people who are in protracted conflict who've been going on, why is this empathy, why are we in this deficit? Why does that go away? Why do we have such a hard time being empathetic and compassionate to the other person who really is a human being? Why do you feel that is?
Yeah, it's like in our society, there seems to be such an empathy deficit in general. We have all these wars, we have all this crime, we have all, like in our political system, we have people, not talking, different sides not talking to each other. We have, fierce competition. So it's like within that whole spectrum of experience, why is there such a shortage of empathy? If empathy is such a good thing, it's like, why isn't everybody being empathic all the time? And that's a kind of a good question. I kind of wonder that about myself. I know from myself, I was kind of like born into this world, and the world was kind of this way when I kind of was born. So I think it's kind of like somehow the world kind of over the centuries kind of created this type of a situation. This is kind of like the world that we're kind of just born into. But it's that now that as we learn more about how empathy works, I think, at least for myself, it's like saying, well, what can I do about the situation as it is now? How can I really go about fostering empathy? How can I see about those wars, those conflicts, and getting both sides to start listening to each other and start dialoguing? How can we start looking at the political situation where the two political sides don't dialogue with each other and have all these put downs, and what can we do to really get those different sides talking to each other within families and within relationships? What can we really do to foster empathic connection between people? And so that's really what I've been kind of looking at ways of, how do we go about doing that? And so for me, it's been really about coming to the intention of doing that. It's like, here I am in this world, I see the importance of empathy. Now I have kind of this intention of wanting to, transform the world and really change it and find ways of changing it. And you could say, why is it that you have this intention? Why should we even bother doing that? And the one thing that comes to me is that neuroscience tells us that when we're heard and understood, that the pleasure centers of our brain light up. So when we're understood, when you hear me, Patty, or I hear you and really hear each other deeply, that there's like a pleasurable sensation that I have. So I think that's really kind of one of the motivating forces, that we can really see that all this conflict is causing a lot of pain, a lot of distress, a lot of discomfort, a lot of dysfunction. And if we foster empathic understanding, we're just going to feel good. We're going to feel connected. We're going to feel a sense of community. We're going to, I think, really work better together as well.
Oh, I'm so glad that and that's a great, response to the fact that we are born into a world, where all of this stuff is going on, and what do we do from this point on? And I must admit that even in my own life that I could probably say that there have been times that I've been deficit in my empathy and compassion, and it's something I have to be intentional and focused and conscious. And so since you started doing this work, did you recognize at any point as you started to do this work your own deficit, and how has that changed in how you're fostering for yourself? Because one, it's fostering for yourself, as you mentioned, right? Fostering empathy for yourself, but then also fostering empathy for others and building this culture. So did you notice a deficit for yourself even in your life?
Well, it's a lot of times you don't notice it unless you kind of feel the opposite of it. And so we've talked about this before, and we didn't want to talk about it in the family part as well. But just in my own family, I kind of grew up in the 60s and 70s and was kind of involved in the generation gap where my family was conservative and I was against them. We had all these arguments and these knockdown, drag-out fights, and I had my kind of self-righteousness. I thought I knew what the answers were, and I was going to educate them on, how much better I knew how the world was. And in turn, they were doing the same thing. And we just didn't know any better, It's just I just didn't have the tools and the way of knowing how to really listen to them. And I think vice versa as well. And so as I've just, this is just from personal experience, that now as I've been learning these tools and these ways of, fostering empathy and nurturing empathy, now I just listen to what they have to say, really try to hear what's underneath what it is that what their experience is, and it's really brought us a lot closer. And I'm so grateful, for it, because it's actually one of the most if I really feel into the experience, it's really one of the most important experiences for me about empathy, is about having that sense of, deeper connection with my own family, so.
Well, I can't wait because we will be doing a special episode on the family, and so I look forward to going deeper with that. And but one thing that you really said, that I don't want to take for granted, because we have listeners of all backgrounds from all over the world who listen, and so being present in your feeling and fully experiencing someone really means really listening. And that deep connection that you were talking. So those tools of really deep listening is so important, and we'll be talking about that constantly. So going back to these two concepts you have on your website, and we've talked a little bit about the wheel of empathy and the feel of empathy. What do you want to share with listeners about what's important to know about these two things?
Yeah, as I've been looking into kind of exploring kind of the individual, components of empathy, I've just kind of been using a metaphor of thinking of it like a wheel, and that like a wheel you can have different spokes that make up the wheel, and that by kind of explaining the seeing empathy as the wheel of empathy, I can kind of explain the different parts, the different components, the different spokes of empathy, and I can keep adding more spokes to the wheel. And so it's just a way of kind of and having kind of a way of kind of getting a handle on it. And so with that, with that wheel of empathy, I'm seeing like 4 components of empathy. And the first one would be self-empathy, and that's really kind of that sense of connection with self, that sensory awareness of what's going on inside of my own body as a sensory awareness. And I kind of think of it as like the metaphor of that we all have an inner spring or an inner well that's flowing. And if we can connect to that flow, sometimes it gets kind of plugged up with anger or, with anxiety or whatever. It just keeps us from being in kind of a free flow from our inner experience. And so that's the basic kind of, the better you can connect to yourself, actually, the better you can connect to others. Mm-hmm. And then when we want to connect with others, there's the next spoke would be mirrored empathy. So that's connecting to others through mirror neurons. So that's that there's these neurons were discovered in the brain that fire when we do an action, but also when we see an action or even hear an action. So as you hear my voice, you can hear the tone of the voice, the excitement or the whatever the tone that you're feeling, that you hear that and you have neurons that are firing that are kind of mimicking it in yourself. And those neurons are called mirror neurons. So so it's this mirrored empathy that when we, maybe a metaphor for that is like a clear mountain lake, that the clearer, the stiller that lake is, the more the surrounding mountains, the snow-capped mountains can be reflected in that clear lake. And in the same way, the calmer I am, the more I can kind of allow through mirror neurons to kind of take in your experience, the full spectrum of your experience. So that was the second spoke. And then the third one would be imaginative empathy. And that's the metaphor for imaginative empathy is that metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes, in the sense that we have an imagination that we can actually feel what it's like or imagine what it's like to be in someone else's situation and feel from that perspective. And actors are like masters of doing that. They just take on a role and they just imagine what it's like to be, the pauper or the rich person, and they can just embody that. And we have the capacity for that. We can do that with inanimate objects, or we can do it with storytellers, with children's books. You are, Peter Rabbit, and what's it like to be Peter Rabbit? And then the fourth part is empathic action, that when we connect with each other kind of in this deeper way, that we're kind of like wired to actually want the well-being of other people, and that we act in a way that contributes and holds an awareness of someone else, and that we act from that. And I really see that, for example, in conflict resolution. I'm sure you've seen it, where two parties are totally, angry with each other. They're totally disconnected. You're listening to them. You're empathizing with them. You ask them to turn to each other. You facilitate empathy. They start understanding each other. They start hearing each other. They start dialoguing with each other. Mm-hmm. They start resonating with each other. And then there comes some kind of a deeper synchronization, that empathic synchronization. And they start understanding each other. And then you say, what do we do now? And, if it was a conflict, the solutions just start kind of pouring out. And they say, well, I can do this. Let's meet once a week for coffee, and we'll discuss our problems on a regular basis. Or, you do this, I do this. And so there's that's what I'm calling the empathic action, is that once you have that established connection, it's the quality of the connection and the cooperation that flows out of that. So that's kind of like this overall model that I find really helpful, as a way of kind of modeling it. And that's just kind of more of the model way of looking at it. But then what is just the feeling of empathy? What does it feel like as a felt bodily experience? And everybody's feeling is different. For me, empathy feels open. It feels spacious, warm, accepting, connecting, loving, and it's even pleasurable, as I'm heard or understood by someone. Those pleasure centers are firing in my brain. So I would be kind of curious, Patty, what your felt sense of empathy is for you.
When I'm on the receiving end of empathy, what it feels like is that someone is genuine and authentic in being with me in that moment. And I find that, and so what that tells me is that they're being real and true and genuinely interested and genuinely caring and listening, which could mean that they're not saying anything. Uh-huh. And especially, I think a lot of times I think of, being on the receiving end of empathy and feeling it, because I like the way that you said that our experience with empathy also helps inform us on how we're doing that for others, and so that warm feeling, as you said, and that feeling of trust and safety, that I feel trust, that I feel completely safe in what that person is experiencing with me, and so that could certainly have the feelings of warmth and relaxation. But not just from a place of where I might be in pain, but a place of excitement and sharing in, like you said, in the joy and the celebration, that they're genuine in experiencing that with me as well. So that's kind of, as I'm reflecting and thinking about it as you're talking about it, it's just like, well, I've never really thought of it from those places. So it's being very intentional, as you said, about how you think about it.
Yeah, it's really about that felt sense, and I was hearing about that genuineness and that authenticity. Another way of kind of building on this felt sense is like, what is your metaphor of empathy? And I ask this question a lot to people, like, well, what's your metaphor? If empathy was an animal or a place or a thing, what would it be like? And I remember one person mentioned to me, they said, empathy is like a magic room that you can be whoever you are. So it's like that authenticity and that genuineness that you were talking about, that you feel safe in this room to be whatever that inner well of experience that is coming up in you can kind of flow freely without having to, dam it up or block it or whatever. It's like it can just freely flow, it's totally safe and accepting. And on top of, in terms of metaphors, which I really enjoy, for me, empathy is like a cornucopia, and in the sense that there's a sense of richness. So it's like a cornucopia that, Noah's horn of plenty. There's all these fruits and vegetables and, all this richness that continuously flows. And for me, that's like when I'm empathically connecting with others, it's that richness of experience that I'm having, because it really opens up my world to, a whole spectrum of, beautiful, wonderful, nurturing, lovely feelings and experiences. And I'd be kind of curious what your metaphor would be if you had to come up with one.
That, when you were saying that, which is a great question, and by the way, it sounds like it could be a great assignment. I would like to really think about that and respond to you in our second episode. Would you be willing to wait? I really want to think about and really reflect intentionally about and I love your cornucopia, example, and so I'd like to do that since we're going to be talking again very soon. So that will be my assignment.
Let's make it the general assignment, then, if everybody brings in their thinks about what their metaphor of empathy is. Empathy is like.
Empathy is like. So is that their call to action for this week then?
It could be, because just thinking about it and tuning into it can be a step towards fostering empathy. Really, okay. Because once you kind of tune into that felt sense, and the beautiful thing about metaphor, it connects, at least for me, it really connects to a more felt emotional sense. And that we want to, not be just thinking about abstract empathy out there, but really what is this felt bodily experience? What are we sensing when we're sensing empathy?
Okay, all right, So listeners, I'm going to make a commitment to this assignment this week. We always do an assignment for the week because we want you to take the next step, and we're going to be taking a step every single week on how do we build empathy, how do we get intentional about it, and I love the mirror, the 4 steps or the 4 the 4 spokes of your wheel. And there's actually a visual representation on your website. There's a whole page, listeners, of these metaphors and also the definitions that show the wheel and the feel of empathy. So I really do encourage you to go to cultureofempathy.com and look at the visuals for those of you who are visual learners to look at that. But one of the assignments that I'm taking from this, and you might even have another assignment, because I know I have the guest always do an assignment, but I know for our next session I will be ready. In fact, I'm going to journal about it to talk about what is empathy like, and especially how do I feel it in my bodily experience and in that feeling place. So I'm going to definitely be journaling about, and we'll respond to you in our next episode. Now, did you have another assignment that you wanted listeners to take on?
Well, I would like for people to check out the website and just kind of peruse it a little bit. But in terms of this assignment, another thing that's really fun is to do a drawing of your metaphor. Is to actually get some paper and pen or some crayons and actually draw it and share it with someone that's close to you. Say, hey, this is my metaphor of empathy.
Oh, I love that. This is so much fun. I can't wait to, and I've got lots of markers and stuff. I do a lot of graphic stuff, so not that I'm an artist, but but this will be fun to do. So drawing, markers, crayons, whatever, does that for you. So, okay, so listeners, you have your assignment to start really getting into, what does this metaphor look like, feel like, what is it for you, and even take a way of drawing that and sharing that with others. All right, so we are going to be continuing our second episode. We'll continue this conversation. We're going to be looking at how do we start to build that. We'll talk a little bit more about these empathy circles that you do. I really want to, learn more about that and have listeners participate in those empathy circles. And, in fact, do you have any upcoming empathy circles between now and next week that people can experience?
Actually, yeah, if you going to the website and there's a link to the empathy circles, you'll see that every Saturday we have an open empathy circle. It's at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and you can just drop in via Google Hangouts, and we'll kind of explain the empathy circle up and actually do some empathic listening exercises there. And it goes for about 2 hours.
Do they have to be there the whole 2 hours, or do they just come apart?
You can just drop in during that time and drop out to your meeting to go.
Okay, and it's 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if it's East Coast, it's 11 East Coast and 12 o'clock, 9 to 10 to 11, 12 o'clock East Coast time, 11 o'clock Central Standard, 9 a.m. Pacific, every Saturday that you do that on Google Hangout. And then they can get the link and all of that on your website where it says Empathy Circles in.
Right.
Okay, excellent. Wow, this is going to be such a fun series that we're doing and so informative, but also, what are the steps that we're taking? I guess part of that spoke is that empathic action of us building empathy. So for today's episode, what is it you would like to leave as a final message for our listeners?
My message is more like a call to let's get together and transform society and really our world society and build a culture of empathy. That's just my basic message and call to action.
Well, I love that, and I'm so glad that you've called the call to action, and very loudly, may I, because you're just leading the charge in so many ways, folks. There's so many things that Edwin is doing. It's amazing. These empathy tents and empathy, it's just amazing. You really do need to go check out and be part of it. Don't be passive. Really, and get involved in some of these things that are just awesome experiences, and get the full experience with Edwin. And I can't wait to join one of your empathy circles as well. I'm very excited about that. Edwin, thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thank you, Patty. It was wonderful chatting with you. Look forward to next week as well.
All right. Awesome. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.